We hope you enjoyed this film at LACMA presentation of A Broken House. My name is Eliciana Nascimento. I'm an assistant professor of cinematography and film production in the Sidney Poitier New American Film School at Arizona State University. I'm also here representing ASU Film Spark, a program that connects ASU students to the film industry. Joining me today are director Jimmy Goldblum and film participant Mohamad Hafez. Let's start with you, Jimmy. What personal connection did you have with the film, and how Mohamad's story connected with yours?
Yeah, I grew up the son of an immigration lawyer in Philadelphia. My mom has been an immigration lawyer for over 3 decades. And so I think I grew up in a pretty syncretic culture in Philadelphia. We're always going to the homes of her clients. And I've always really, I think, believed that immigration was something that just was continually enriching to our culture and the society. I was in the suburbs of Philadelphia where like a Target opening was a big deal. So to be able to travel and to see other cultures or to be in other people's homes was always something really valuable for me in my childhood. And I also my wife is a Muslim immigrant from Pakistan. And at the time in which I first discovered Mohamad's story was around 2017. So it was in the context of the Muslim ban that was happening in the previous administration. And it was just an incredibly painful time in our life and, a really terrifying time in our life. And I think that for me, with the privileges that I had, I was really trying to figure out how I could do something. And so when I discovered Mohamad's story, I saw in him someone who was trying to kind of fill this void of storytelling about Muslim immigrants and refugees. There was such, it was just like horrifying how people were being dehumanized. And I think that the way the media sort of spoke about immigrants was as if they were, coming to take from us, or when it comes to refugees, that they were born at the border, they were born in tents. There was no sense of storytelling around the lives that they were giving up. It was always focused on what they were getting when they were here. And so I just really connected to it. And I saw an opportunity with Mohamad to just change the lens a little bit, to focus on the lives that people had to give up, the lives that they missed, the families that they miss, the cultures they miss when they come to the United States.
Mohamad, how do you feel about having your personal story in the film? And have you ever thought about telling your story?
Yes, I have thought about telling my own story. In fact, as you know, by profession, I'm a full-time architect. Worked for a company that designs skyscrapers. So for about 15 years, my public persona was that corporate architect. And for that 15 years, my art was secret. Nobody knew about it other than my parents, who would come to my house, and my mom would slap me on and say, make something happy, enough destruction. And I made the conscious decision to try to humanize by sharing my personal story when my brother-in-law and sister became refugees in Sweden themselves. And I went and saw them, and it was a very shocking experience for me, because you just see them in the comfortable life in Damascus. The last time I saw them in the beautiful home, and he was a very, also my age, best friend, successful architect, beautiful house designed by himself, and so on. And to see him in a refugee camp in Sweden kind of shook me. And then you can't help but to ask yourself, why was I saved? I could have been that person instead of my brother-in-law. And you can't help but to say, well, what am I going to do about it? So all of a sudden, when you realize the blessing of living in the West and the United States, and having a roof on top of your head and a job and a peaceful life, and you're not having to cross the Mediterranean with 50 people in a little dinghy during the night on the float, you realize that you've been saved and you've been spared. But with that comes a guilt feeling, the survivor's guilt that says, what am I going to do about it? And the answer in my mind could no longer be, well, I have a job here and I'm spending 80 hours a week designing beautiful glassy buildings. The answer was, okay, your art, you have to share it with the world. You have to share with the story with the world, and you have to embrace vulnerability, and you have to learn how to talk about it. This was very critical for me because I'm such an introvert person. I don't want to speak. And Jimmy's proposal and film was just the right thing to do and the right solution at the right moment. And it just all felt natural, on point. And I said, okay, I'm all ears. Let's do it.
Yeah, I'm so glad you accepted, and you two seemed to have worked so well together. Your art merged so well with Jimmy's film. The language that Jimmy chose to tell the story just, speaks of the work that you're doing. And my question to Jimmy is, how did you choose this style? Because when I watched the film, I knew I was watching a documentary, but at some point I feel like, wait a minute, is it a narrative? I see some dolly pulling in, and I see a texture of celluloid film. Is it really a documentary? It felt like a narrative to me. Do you want to talk a little bit about the style?
I mean, that's such a compliment, and I know you teach cinematography as well. So I'm like, oh, you know the tricks I was pulling. But to me, it's like, I think that sometimes there's this idea of like, what's a documentary and what's not a documentary, and like to me, it's like, what I'm doing is I'm creating a space for Mohamad, right? Like that's the most important thing, which is like to create a space that feels safe, that feels protected, where he's allowed to be as vulnerable and honest as possible. And then ultimately all the camera things I'm doing hopefully just sort of fall by the wayside, and it all feels like it's part of a process of that honesty and vulnerability. But, I was making a lot of choices in terms of how I felt when I was in the presence of Mohamad's art, how I'd want that reflected in the film, right? And so when I look at Mohamad's art, it's dusty. It's you see the little cracks and the detail intricacies. I mean, it has a real texture to it. And I was like, there's no way I want to shoot this on digital. Like, we have to shoot on celluloid. So I made a choice to shoot on Super 16, which, has a really strong documentary tradition, right? Like some of the greatest documentaries ever filmed were on Super 16. But what I love about Super 16 also is that it encourages creating that presence on set. It's just like, we don't have the ability to shoot. We don't have the budget to shoot all day. Let's be really intentional about what we're getting in terms of creating that space. But it also, like, just beautifully, I think, reflects the sort of grain and the texture and the pop of colors that you see in Mohamad's work. So that was what that choice was about. And then also, like, his art, like, really, like, I found myself when I was looking at it, just almost like putting my head in it, because there's just so much detail. And I was like, you can't have the lens outside of the art. You have to be inside of it. So I was talking about it with my cinematographer, Ali, who I worked with in Connecticut, and he sort of proposed this snorkel lens system, or also called like a periscope lens system, which is essentially an attachment to the camera. There's a very long lens that allows you to go into the space. It's traditionally used in like Hollywood sort of prop building to like create a city, and then it looks like it's, a little miniature of New York. All of a sudden it looks like New York, and then you can have a tsunami come in. That's what this is traditionally used for. But we got one to shoot Mohamad's art, and it allowed us to kind of break down, I think, the walls between what is Mohamad's art world and what is the actual world of Syria, and how can we blend the two, which I thought was very thematically linked into the ways in which he was recreating the Syria of his memories, of his dreams. And so the blurriness between those boundaries was something I really wanted to explore in the film.
Yes, it definitely brought a sense of nostalgia, like every element in the film, the texture, the type of lighting that you all designed, the shots, how the shots were composed, and the sound design as well, like the elements we see in the scene. We see things that are kind of like very old, not very modern, and we get that sense of nostalgia. So Mohamad, how did you participate in the creation of those shots and merged your art in the production of this film?
I didn't participate. They were background noise. I was in my comfortable cocoon in my studio, and whenever I'm here, it's more of a ritual practice, you know. Whenever I'm in it's my refuge. It's really my safe space. And when Jimmy came, I had been, you know, I had many interviews and media, so I taught myself to kind of ignore the camera a little bit. Yeah, when I'm making art, I'm in a different zone. It's very hard to describe, but also the scenes where I think we got lucky because I was in an emotional moment as well. The scenes with my mom speaking, there was just so much inside me that I wanted to talk to her about, and I couldn't. So they caught a, you know, a moment in time, and we lucked out because I don't break up in tears in front of my mom ever. So
it was a very sweet moment, sad but also very sweet, because we all connect to that. I mean, I'm immigrant myself and have been away from my family for such a long time, and I felt, you know, like how you felt being away from your family at that moment. And it's something that's so hard to cover in documentary and in narrative. We have to pull so much from our talent and juggle with lighting and everything to create that sentiment. And you guys were able to capture that so naturally. So Jimmy, do you want to tell us how was that for you to capture moments like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, it's interesting, right? Because there's this sort of natural, I think, well, hopefully there's a natural trust building that comes through the process of making a film together, right? And so Mohamad, I consider him a participant in telling his own story, right? He's a collaborator in telling his own story. And like, I'm not trying to trick him into doing things for me. It's a very open dialogue around what I'm trying to explore and what I'm interested in. And it's a dialectic between us, right? And so I like to believe that there's a sort of natural rapport that comes, that like you learn with what we're filming and us showing material back, that like this is getting to the truth of your experience. We're mining for truth, right? And so the scene with Mohamad and his mother was the last thing that we filmed, like period. That was the last thing that we filmed. And in some respects, I feel like it was all sort of leading towards that. But there's then also this other layer that I've found kind of interesting in like the year I've been away since finishing the film, right? It's like now we're just bringing it out into the world. So I have time to reflect on the actual process of making it. And like the time at which I was making the film, I was going through such an incredibly hard time with my own parents, specifically around like their inability to see what was going on with my wife as like a Muslim in this country. And there was just like, you know, so I would be filming and then I'd go home and be having these like incredibly traumatizing conversations. And like, I just feel like there was something energetic that like maybe Mohamad and I were never really even talking about, but that like there was just an energy, I think, of like needing to confront our families that like somehow met like almost spiritually without us even needing to address it in our language, if that makes sense. It's like my woo-woo theory, but I really do believe it.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting how directors connect so much with subject story. This is happening to me right now. I'm making a film about a Brazilian ballerina living in London, and her story is almost like my story. The only difference is like I cannot dance.
Wow.
But
That's so cool.
there is a very interesting connection.
So, Mohamad, as a filmmaker, I'm always curious to know how participants feel about how they are portrayed in the film. So, how do you feel about your story? Would you have changed anything? Were you happy with everything that Jimmy did with your story?
I'll tell you, I have no problem being open about my experience. Before Jimmy came, I've been featured by a lot of media, especially prominent media. One of the things that bugged me with these features is that I felt that I was being cornered most of the time or framed as the depressed Syrian artist that is infatuated with his destruction. While that's was correct in some point, there was another half of the story that was left out. But nobody's interested in the story of hope, of rebuilding, of moving forward, of humanizing refugees and immigrants, and telling my family story. The videos that were made then, they were just focusing on destruction. Like, here's the lunatic guy modeling detailed photo destruction and move on. And I've always got annoyed by that persona. And even to the point where, a lot of my exhibits, they would say, we want the destruction pieces. Or I say, I have hope pieces. I have a lot of nice pieces that are about rebuilding. No, we want the destruction pieces. Like, okay. What Jimmy did was so nice, and I would not change a single thing in it. I was so happy with the film. Every single time I watch that film, I get something new out of it. And as a good director, he kept me in the dark until he was done, showed me the film, and I said, this is beautiful. I was afraid, I was scared, but I really did not worry too much about it. When I saw it, it was really done so well. And the reason being, I think, is, again, he caught me in a moment in time where I don't even remember most of those years. I go to watch his documentary to remember that mood that I was in, I couldn't care less about the crew around me or what's going on, really. He caught me in that moment, and I think that's what speaks to the authenticity of this true moment. I mean, just to give you an example, we've, my family have watched the film, and we've yet to speak about it. It's like his film is so powerful that it's like the elephant in the room that we're all not going to speak about it, and we're going to ask Mohamad about his cat, rather.
Yes, I bet. I was wondering about that too, how your family was going to react to all of this, because it is, very moving to everyone. It's a very sensitive topic. Do you guys want to talk about the response you have been receiving about the film so far from the audience?
Yeah, I mean, it's been, it's interesting is because we finished filming in January 2020, right? So, and then we went into this pandemic, and we were supposed to premiere, at a big film festival in May of 2020, and everything got canceled. And it was a hard rollout in so many respects. Like, we went months, and I was so frustrated because I believed in this film so much, and it was just doing nothing. And then I think something happened just like in the middle of the pandemic, where all of a sudden, Mohamad is sort of speaking at the end of the movie that it's been 14, 15 years since his family has been under one roof. And, he's missed weddings, he's missed funerals, he's missed connecting with his loved ones. And I think because of the reality of the pandemic, that suddenly became everyone's experience, not just immigrants, not just refugees. It was everyone's experience. We were all missing our loved ones. We were all missing these major events. And I think like something just shifted where like the audience was now meeting the film on a different playing field in some respects. And the response has just been amazing. It's been absolutely amazing. I mean, the first film festival that we played in person, which was Palm Springs Shorts Fest, which is the largest short film festival in North America. I mean, I was basically weeping the entire time I was watching it in a theater because I just missed being in theaters so much. And the movie is quite emotional for me. But then during the Q&A, about a 70-year-old man from Nigeria stood up, and he was crying a lot. And he was just like, thank you for telling my story. This is my story. And, you know, it had been 40 years since he'd been home. And we've gotten so many responses like that from various immigrant communities where, you know, we've captured a feeling that I think so many people feel, which is like, I'm building my life here, right? I'm building my life and I love so much of my life, but I'm also giving up so much being here. And I think that the movie, I'm grateful for Mohamad's vulnerability because I think his openness around what he was experienced has allowed a lot of people to come in and reflect and share. So that's been my experience. I don't know, Mohamad, have you got it? What's it been like for you?
Ever since I started taking the art public and deciding to embrace vulnerability, it has treated me so well. You got to remember that I check the box on so many things. I am Muslim, Arab, Middle Eastern, raised in Saudi Arabia, named Mohammed, Syrian, brother to a refugee, immigrant himself, came here to an F1 visa. I check the box on so many things. So I think there's appetite out there to hear from people with similar backgrounds like me, and I think what the movie does is it establishes a huge common denominator between me and the audience from a human experience. Then it opens up their minds and hearts to see my story or the Syrian conflict or the immigrant conflict or all of that from a different lens, from a different perspective. It puts them in our shoes in a different way. So I've had nothing but really warm feedback. I'll tell you something. Some of my exhibits do talk about refugee baggage, and I've had exhibits where I got groups of people wearing like "Women for Trump" T-shirts and coming in, and it's like just the body language is very prominent, and then they look at my suitcases and they hear these immigrant stories, and at the end of the exhibit, I remember one time 2 girls they didn't say a word to me. They had tears in their eyes, but all they did is like this. They left. They said, and they had tears in their eyes and they left. And to me, these reactions are more than enough. And I felt that with the movie as well. That sometimes you feel somebody like, I can't talk to you. I want to tell you 10 million questions. I want to apologize, but I'm just not. I'm going to appreciate this beauty and thank you for the experience. And that to me is just a world of gratitude in itself.
Yes, I think that's what I love most about this film, and I believe it's what everyone it's the perspective that you chose to tell this story. As you mentioned in your press release, that films about conflict really dramatize the violence and everything that's going on in these countries. But with Mohamad's story, we get a sense of humanization of this topic, and we feel connected, and so many people from different backgrounds will connect to the stories like this. So it's you really did something special, choosing their perspective to tell the story.
Thank you.
So I guess my last question to you, as we are running out of time, is I get such a sense of nostalgia when I watch this. And I feel like I want to know more. And I guess that's the feeling that we get when we watch shorts, right? It's like, we want to know more. What about the siblings? And what about, the mom? Well, why the mom doesn't want to come to the US? And, do you think about making a future out of this, or creating a series or anything? I understand that it's already an amazing film on its own, and it's winning so much awards, but we feel like we want to know more about Mohamad and his story.
Yeah, well, I'll speak to some of this, and then Mohamad can say. But it actually started as a series idea, in the sense that I was working on a TV show for Apple called Home, about architects and the ways that they thematically explore the ideas of home in their work. And so Mohamad's story first came to me as part of the research process of setting up that show. And so it was going to be an hour-long episode of television. And I'm sorry, Mohamad, you've heard me say this many times, and I will caveat that Mohamad lives in an absolutely beautiful home, but Apple rejected the story because they didn't think his house was fancy enough. So like, I then had to figure out how to tell this story, because I was obsessed at that point. I was like, this is a lens that we do not see. This is a perspective that we do not see. Like, it is a crime to me culturally that we have this incredible narrative, and we're going to just throw it to the dustbin for such a unbelievably arbitrary and superficial and frankly nonsensical reason. So, that was the way in which I came into the story. But for me, like, I am obsessed with, I think, nostalgia. Like, my previous feature was called Tomorrow We Disappear, and it was about an artist colony in India where 2,800 traditional artists lives. All the magicians, acrobats, and puppeteers in New Delhi lived in what we would consider in the West like a slum, but it was where the traditional arts survived. And it was getting knocked down in order to build New Delhi's first ever skyscraper. And the only reason I'm talking about this is because it's this idea of like art and culture and like cultural loss, like what Mohamad is talking about in Damascus, like cultural loss in Syria. I'm obsessed with this idea. And so like, when I discovered him, I was like, oh my God, I get to like come back to my obsessions again. And I just really, really wanted to hit that theme of Harayath. I just really wanted to explore it as much as I could, because Mohamad had made an incredible art piece called Harayath, which everyone should go out and look for. And I wanted to make my own film version of Harayath about Mohamad. And so I feel quite proud about it, but I also am very honest about the fact that Mohamad is a rich and complex and dynamic character who, I don't know, if he wants to open his story up again, but there's many more stories to tell. I just wanted to tell the story of Harayath.
Great. Awesome. What about you, Mohamad? Would you want to continue telling the story?
Absolutely. I think a while back, I realized that as an artist and a creative living in the West from Middle Eastern heritage, and after everything we've been through, we have a responsibility to keep telling our stories, and the duty to do that, especially during a very tough xenophobic era in a country that was built by immigrants for immigrants. So to me, it's like I suffered too much based on nothing. A lot of nostalgia, a lot of homesickness based on nothing, just the color of my passport, and there was like no interest. And I hate to see anybody go through that ever again. And to see the United States take the discourse that it took in the last previous administration when it comes to immigrations, it's like to me, I say over my dead body. I'm going to keep humanizing. I'm going to keep telling my story, because this is not the America that I signed up for, and it's truly not America that I know. And I've lived quite a bit in different states, and I've studied, and I'm a proud American citizen as well. So to me, telling the story is more of an activist fight that we just can't stop. We can't stop because yesterday was Syrian immigrants, the flavor of the day. Tomorrow, you never know. Maybe it's Mexicans, maybe it's Spanish. I don't know. So all of us, we have this kind of really duty, all the creators, whether they're artists, filmmakers, you name it. We have this duty right now to stand up to that kind of hate speech and demagoguery.
Oh yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because I do believe that films like this can bring a lot of healing, not just discussion and awareness of what all immigrants, refugees have been going through in the US. And I'm making a film about, a Brazilian in London, and she's dealing with similar situation. And can bring discussions and also healing, right? Especially the perspective that you chose that's so unique, that doesn't build up on the trauma and expectations that everyone has about this issue.
I'm so glad you made this film, Jimmy. And thank you, Mohamad, for sharing your story. And a special thanks to Film at LACMA for this special event. Thank you very much.